Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside David Corbin. Glad to have you with us to explore the ideas behind today's headlines.
My left eye sees pollution. Those dirty fuels are burning. The earth's whole climate's churning. Clean energy solution. My right eye scans the bill. Fossil fuels are cheap. Wind and solar too steep. Drill, baby, drill. Predefined, misaligned, polarized division. Shuttered mind, worse than blind. 2020 vision.
How's it going, Dave?
Going well, Matt. Good April, May 1st today, right? May 1st taping, and getting that much closer to the summer. We had a great last week of April. We took my son Patrick, who's graduated from college, to the NFL draft in Green Bay and just had a blast. It was amazing. It was
That's terrific.
yeah, never been to Green Bay before. I still can't get over how small the city is with a
I know.
franchise. I mean, it's like the franchise is the city, but
Yeah.
it was just a great time. Got to go to Lambeau Field. The draft itself is just a great, great time. I mean, I call it everyone's Super Bowl because everyone's going to get the player in the draft who takes them to the next level. So we had an
Right.
awesome time. Good stuff. And now no more snow or very little snow in Colorado. So just getting ready for hopefully a dry summer.
Yeah. So I guess you survived the ski season then.
I did. Nothing broken. 2 years in a row.
Yeah. Impressive.
I'm not trying
Very
hard
good.
enough, I guess. So
Yeah. No, the NFL draft, that would be a great time, I'm sure. I just, hope springs eternal, right? So everyone sees this guy could be the one, the new quarterback, the next great thing.
yeah, well, next year Pittsburgh is closer to you than Green Bay.
Oh, yeah.
I think
Okay.
yeah, we're gonna try to go and make it 3 years in a row. We went last year to Detroit, so Detroit, Green Bay.
Okay.
I'm sure Pittsburgh will be a good time as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. They'll turn out for that for sure. Well, we've been telegraphing it for a while, but today we are marking the end of the first 100 days of the Trump presidency. And of course, there's been a lot of discussion of that this week. President Trump himself giving a major speech, which we'll talk about. Lots of commentary, people giving evaluations, interviews, and all the rest. So, we've had good timing in this series of podcasts. We've been checking in every 3 weeks, and we've been able to hit topics that seem to be corresponding with the headlines. And yet, as always, we want to try to get behind those headlines and give kind of a broader context for some of the things that are happening out there. So our plan today is to kind of walk through President Trump's speech from the other day and some of the things that he says he's accomplished, talk about that, and then move into our grand Trump theories. So, Dave, you introduced your theory a bit last time. I want to expand on that a little bit. And then I'll talk a little bit about my thoughts on Trump's own self-understanding and how that kind of fits into the picture you're painting. And then we're going to close it off with Tocqueville's crystal ball, making Kentucky Derby picks. So hazardous, as always, for us to pick sports, especially ones that I know at least so little about, but it's always a good time. All right, so President Trump speaks 2 days ago in Michigan. As always, we're recording on Thursday afternoon. And not surprisingly, runs an hour and a half. He's got a big crowd there. He loves the big crowds, loves the events. Had a script, there's no doubt. There's some lines were well prepared, but other things, where he just goes off and does his thing. So I want to kind of walk through the speech. And again, we're thinking about his framing of these 100 days. What is it he wants to draw our attention to? What are the accomplishments he wants to highlight at this point of his presidency? So take a look at that and then get your thoughts, Dave, in reaction to this. As always, a bit of Trump hyperbole, maybe a little over the top, but also some things probably that we can say were genuine accomplishments along the way. So he begins saying, "We're here tonight in the heartland of our nation to celebrate the most successful first 100 days of any administration in the history of our country, and that's according to many, many people. This is the best, they say, 100-day start of any president in history, and everyone is saying it." So there you go. Sets the tone in a very Trumpian way.
Many people
Many,
becomes
many.
everyone.
Right. Yeah, and that's actually part of my overall Trump theory, right? That there's a certain many that counts and a many that doesn't count. But the many that counts is praising these 100 days and calling it the most consequential in history. So he goes through and he spends a lot of the time marking off various areas of accomplishment. One of the first he highlights is the work he's done at the border, which has really been an extraordinary turnaround. You think about the hundreds of thousands of people that were crossing the border each month throughout the Biden presidency, almost from day one to the very end, and that's gone down to almost zero. So clearly something he promised and something that he's accomplished, and certainly for those that supported his candidacy, and even many that didn't, honestly, securing the border was an important priority. So that was certainly something you would expect him to highlight and to boast about, and there was a cause for boasting.
Yeah, and I think for good reason, Matt. I think it's difficult for someone who's living on Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts to really care about illegal border crossings. But in heartland United States, El Paso and other places, this isn't some dreamed up picture of something that's gone
Right.
wrong. It's the reality of people in front of you and of crime, of the things that come with the lack of the rule of law being enforced. And I think it was rightfully asserted as a main priority of the Trump administration. And here is a place where I think that there's been success and we would hope would be continued success in trying to get those illegal immigrants out of the country, especially those who are dangerous.
Right. And of course, one of the things that really made this an issue beyond El Paso and those border towns in Arizona, Texas, etc., was when all of a sudden people were being bussed by those border state governors to places like New York City. And all of a sudden, these blue cities, right, bright blue cities, were saying, "Whoa, we don't have the capacity to handle thousands of people coming and requiring social services." And El Paso says, "Yeah, we know about that. We don't either.
Okay.
In fact, we
Right.
have a lot less than you do." So that really nationalized the issue in a way that hadn't been up until this point.
Yeah, and I think that in the speech, right, I'm sure you'll hit on this. There's a lot of mention of common sense, common sense, common sense, and I think some of these things really are common sense, right? If you don't have the services in place to treat people who are coming in that you just don't have room and space for, you're going to have great difficulties. And to think that you wouldn't is what I would call elite nonsense versus common sense. And there was a lot of elite nonsense, and I think our immigration policies were part of that elite nonsense. So getting back to common sense on this issue, I think was very, very important.
Yeah, and that's how I actually framed his whole presidency. In fact, he says what the world has witnessed in the past 14 weeks is a revolution of common sense. That's all it is, really. And so the common sense of the average person paired up against, and then very much along the lines of what you just said, this kind of ruling class understanding of things. He says, we're taking back our country from a sick political class that got rich selling America out and bleeding America dry. Some speechwriter did all right with that line. But you see the contrast there, right? Those that have the interests of true Americans at heart, those who are following common sense, just sort of normal, rational ways of thinking about things, who have their eyes open, who aren't talking ideologically or taken over by some master vision of a remade society, but are just living their lives, doing their thing, versus people that see opportunity to control, to benefit, and to do it at the expense of their fellow citizens.
Yeah, one of the things that followed up this speech the next day, which was yesterday, Wednesday, was the meeting of his cabinet. And speaking of common sense and hopefully getting back to founding father norms, to his left and to his right were the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and to his right, Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And when you think about the federal government and its origins and what it was meant to do, primarily, it's to think through what America as a country, how it will be protected abroad, how it will be
Right.
united from within, but protected from abroad. So this is another common sense kind of, I don't know if it was purposeful or not, but to have those two main cabinet secretaries to your left and to your right showcases, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is a kind of defining the United States in its original terms.
Yeah, so some clear early success when it comes to the border and in terms of restoring common sense talk. He goes on to talk about um, transgender issues and things of this sort. And just we think about the whole woke, not even the policies, but just the way of speaking and the way of framing issues and just starting to speak in common terms and language people understand again. So all that you can say very much a priority and emphasis in these early months and a lot accomplished there. I would say the next section of speech, we get into more of the incompletes. So he talks about we're respected now all over the world. They're coming from all over the world to see your president. They're coming from India, from France, from Spain, from China, and they all want to make a deal. And he says, "Yeah, well, we'll make a deal if we want to make a deal. We don't have to make a deal because we're America and we have all the stuff." Well, we'll see. I think, we talked about tariffs and trade last time, and we went through some of the pluses and minuses of the tariff approach that President Trump has taken. But I think it remains to be seen just how much of an economic impact we're going to have to bear from the changes that he's proposed and just how sweet those deals will be that eventually come out of these negotiations.
Here's the question. Can deal making get us to where we need to be as a country? And there is, I think, throughout this speech and throughout these 100 days, there is a great emphasis placed on the federal administrative state, which is ironic, right? Because I think those who are center right and more conservative, when we think about how we revive the country and how we get to where we want to go, we're not turning to the government for answers, but this is a speech and this is 100 days that have been celebrated where an administration is highlighted as kind of taking the country to where it needs to go through its deal-making apparatus,
Yeah.
its control of the monopoly board, et cetera.
Yeah, and he also wants to emphasize, though, at the same time, that he is rolling back regulations. So later in the speech, he makes a big point about paper straws, right? What's more annoying than paper straws? And I mean,
Almost nothing.
yeah,
Almost nothing.
no, it's a perfect issue. I mean, you want to be a man of the people and not just the 44% that voted this way or that, I mean, a man of the 98%, right? Be in favor of getting rid of paper straws. And he talks about some of these other things. Remember, there was a discussion recently about whether we are going to have to get rid of our gas stoves and things of this sort, right? All these regulations that we're going to reach towards some environmental utopia at the expense of the everyday wants, interests, and desires of your average American. And so, he's on top of that kind of stuff. And these are all easy wins where, again, it just seems like common sense. Roll back these regulations, let people make reasonable decisions. There's plenty of ways to deal with whatever challenges arise from plastic straws that don't require us to all eat these mealy mouth paper straws that disintegrate the minute you stick them in your Coke.
I think a lot of the power of the administration thus far really boils down to the ability to talk about these things openly and not feel embarrassed to complain about
Right.
things that everyone really should complain about, right?
Right. We all grumble about
just,
it.
yeah, his willingness to assert common sense truths allows, us, right, to say them out loud without wondering whether we're going to get canceled or looked down upon or scorned, et cetera.
Right.
And I don't think that the other side of this political equation understands just how much they look down their noses at others and how much they have discriminated against those who just think differently from them. And I don't think he realizes just how authoritarian not only they want government to be, but they want their authority over us morally to be. So that's been
Right.
liberating, and I think that is the power, I think, of the current administration.
So another example of that, he's talking about energy, and he says, in my administration, anytime you say the word coal, you have to say clean, beautiful coal, which is it's classic Trump. Everything's beautiful to Trump, right? That is the highest compliment to Trump is beauty.
Yeah.
And so clean, beautiful coal is the thing you talk about. And of course, no one wanted to talk about coal. We're embarrassed by coal because coal
Yep.
is dirty and the people that dig for coal are dirty, and the whole part of the country that's involved with coal is dirty. And
Yep.
no, it's clean and it's beautiful, says President Trump. And so again, that's kind of resonates with a lot of people who would say, yeah, let the coal miners do their thing. Right? It's hard
Yeah.
work. They're working hard. Let's give them a chance to, we can have hydropower if we want to have that too, and we can have windmills and all the rest, but let the coal miners mine.
Those are we drove back from Wisconsin. Those windmills are anything but beautiful. They're
That's true.
they're big and they're everywhere. The
Well,
whole landscape. Yeah.
yeah, the funny thing is in Western Pennsylvania, where all the coal mines are, there's as many windmills. Right? Where we go, my parents' cabin on the lake, there's all kinds of coal mined around there. And woe to you if you get behind a coal truck going up one of those mountains because you're gonna be behind them for a while. But equally spread out in the middle of these old fields where you used to have these big farms, you have these big windmills spinning. So yeah,
Crazy.
it's a good picture of the old and the new. But anyway, President Trump happy to praise the coal miners along with everybody else. And then he has a section where he talks about Main Street versus Wall Street in classic Trumpian way. So he loves Main Street. He mentions that he does own a building on Wall Street, which, we worked right around the corner from that
Yep.
back at King's. I mean, it was literally a stone's throw from 40 Wall Street, which is his building there. But even though he owns that building and he would love to get you in there, make you a deal, you want a little bit
That
of
building,
office
by the way,
space.
Matt, that building, just to interrupt here, is clean, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful as well. I just want to, it's as
It's
clean,
a,
beautiful, and gorgeous as the coal.
it is. It's a beautiful building, one of the most beautiful buildings in the world, he says. And I believe it. I mean, I've seen it. It's a gorgeous building. So yeah, but all that having been said, he loves Main Street more.
Yeah, and for good reason. I mean, he's in the office that he's in because of Main Street.
Yeah, that's for sure.
He's in the office that he's in because, as you've said, he understands common sense. He understands Main Street. He has found out a way to communicate with Main Street America, unlike any Republican over the last 50 or 60 years. It's remarkable. Now, it can be excessive. There's hyperbole. There's all, but at the end of the day, right, he gets Main Street. I think you could see this very early on that there was a connection between him and Main Street. And it goes back to this thesis that I think a lot of what moves the president is the type of person that he wants to like him.
Yeah,
He cares more about the people on Main Street liking him, right, than the people who are other elites. And why that happened, how that came into being over the course of his life, I don't know the answer to that question, but it's certainly part of his psyche.
yeah, no, it's absolutely. So toward the end of the speech, he starts talking about changes he'd made in the military and ending men participating in women's sports. That's an 80-20 issue, he was told. He says, no, it's a 97-3 issue when you really get behind it, because everybody recognizes the unfairness and unreasonability of having men competing against women in sports.
But I mean,
Um,
that's true once again, though, man. It goes back to something we said earlier. If you were to poll 100 people, right, at a college campus,
yeah,
you might have a 50-50 split in terms of those who would say yes or no to this. But in our college classrooms, you'd be hard pressed to find a student who would raise their hand and raise an objection to the current culture. So it might seem 80-20, 90-10 the other way when people are just kind of holding back their opinions.
right.
But here, once again, he'll take those 50-50 issues, and by being assertive, right, all of a sudden you're willing to say, no, no, I think this is wrong. I think this doesn't make sense. I don't think that women should be playing in men's sports. So he pushes 50-50 issues to 75-25 issues, maybe not 97-3,
Right.
but he can push
Yeah.
opinion that way by asserting himself.
Well, when Gavin Newsom is on the record as saying that men shouldn't play women's sports, you've made some progress on the issue.
Yeah, exactly.
So he wraps up the speech by looking ahead and talking about the things yet to be done. And of course, we know number one issue there for him is his one big, beautiful bill, which will cut taxes and cut spending and rebuild the military and do all kinds of things. So we know under current rules, you basically have one shot a year because they have this process called reconciliation that allows for a bill to go through without dealing with filibuster in the Senate. And so if you have a bare majority in the House and Senate, which is more or less what the president has, You got to cram everything into your one big, beautiful bill and get it all done in that one shot you have with reconciliation. So that's still working its way through the House and Senate. We'll see what happens when that finally comes to the floor in both those places and the final um, resolution of all that. But he says once that's done, we will all have take-home pay $5,000 more than it was before, taxes cut, military restored, spending reduced appropriately. So sounds great. We'll see. That's difficult to deliver on, but this is the vision he has for the next, say, 100 days beyond and the rest of his presidency. At the end, he closes with classic Trumpian language. Says, our golden age has only just begun. We are one people, one family, one glorious nation under God. We will never give in. We will never give up. We will never back down. We will never, ever surrender. We will fight, 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 and we will win, win, win. Together, we will make America powerful again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America healthy again. We will make America strong again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. And we will make America great again.
Yeah, I think this boils down to the we that he's talking about here is Main Street. It's not Wall Street.
Right.
And there are divisions and factions within the country that prevent us from becoming a true we. But I think the things that he's trying to emphasize among the we that back him are things that are good, but you still have this division or split. And, to what degree are you welcoming in others under the umbrella of this new we-ness? That would be a big, big question. And can you do that? And what would it take to do that as an executive?
Right. And this goes back even to President Trump's original inaugural address back in 2017. One of the things that you notice that's just different from Republicans and conservatives of the last 40 years, he doesn't say we will make America free again. There's no emphasis on liberty, on freedom, strength, healthiness, wealthiness, pride, right? The kind of patriotic element, strong national defense. But it's never been a central feature of the Trump vision that we would just have a kind of limited government, elbow room to do your own thing. Certainly wants to get the cultural snobs out of the way and some measure of regulatory overreach. But it's not quite the same vision that we saw coming out of Republicans for the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And that seems to be something of a permanent change at this point for the vision of the Republican Party. And we'll see where that goes after Trump. But I think the themes that he's emphasizing here are the ones we'll see in 2028, 2032, perhaps beyond.
Yeah, I think it goes to something we'll talk about later on, which is there's a difference between values and virtues, right? There's a difference between a people who values something and a people who is virtuous and is free and virtuous in that sense.
Right.
And he wants to value strength. He wants to value wealth. He wants to value fight and value winning. Those are good things, right? Those are all good things, health, wealth, and et cetera. But they're different than kind of virtue, rightly understood in American terms. And I think one of the questions will be moving forward, to what degree does liberty and virtue fit into this vision? Can it fit into this vision longer term as he tries to revive the country and move it forward in the 21st century?
Yep, absolutely. Well, let's transition at this point to your grand Trump theory, Dave. You started to tell us a story last time about how you thought the Trump movement came about. I think there's a lot of interesting elements to that. So why don't you maybe rewind a little bit, give us a running start, and then let's talk through how you think we got to a point where we've really got this significant realignment of the American parties and some of the new language and ideas that have emerged over the last decade or so on the political scene.
Yeah, so one of the most common criticisms that you hear of the Trump administration is that it's frenetic. There's no definition or logic to why he's doing what he's doing. It's just what he thinks of at night, and then he gets on his account, his truth account, and posts it all times of the day. And it's just Trump being Trump, no logic. But I think there's actually a logic to Trump that goes back to a good part of American 20th century history, and in particular, late 20th century American history. there had been throughout American history kind of a division between bohemians and the bourgeois. For a lot of American history, you have the bankers on one side and the artists on the other. And David Brooks, at the beginning of the 21st century, 2001, published his book, "BoBos in Paradise: The New Upper Class and How They Got There." And in many ways, it's a funny accounting of these new elite called BoBos, bourgeois bohemians who have come together as a consensus, who have a certain type of sensibility. But there's some ridiculing going on there as well by Brooks, but it's kind of a playful ridiculing. These are individuals who, on one hand, like to have a big bank account, but on the other hand, are kind of lost in their contradictions, right? They poo-poo, luxury, and yet they drive limousines, et cetera. And I think that there really was something to the creation of this Bobo class, because when you look at the wealthy zip codes across the United States, most of them have very, very progressive values. So they're doing well for themselves financially. Their bank accounts are in good shape.
Right.
But whenever it comes to a social issue or a moral issue or a religious issue, they don't want to pass judgment.
Right.
Or the judgments they want to pass have to be the judgments of the country club, where, oh, it's totally fine if transgendered people play in sports, not of their original sex, etc. And that type of person was ruling the country, I believe, at the beginning of the 21st century. Our mentor, Angela Codevilla, writes a book about them called America's Ruling Class. And I think that was our ruling class. So that consensus, it used to be antithetical to one another in the 20th century.
Hmm.
It comes together where you have kind of that wealthy vice president of the bank, right, who is going to push transgenderism in the local school. And you can talk about this type of person as a caricature, but you go around any of these places with these zip codes and you find them all around. You go to Whole Foods in your neighborhood, right? You'll see them there, right?
Right.
So the last 25 years, I think economically have not been good for America's middle class. The last 25 years have not been good socially and culturally for those Americans who believe in common sense, tradition, the difference between male and female, et cetera. Now, there have been some turnarounds more recently, but if you were to look at that 25-year evolution of America between ruling class, 2001, BoBos, and where we are in 2025, you would have seen more and more, and this I think comes to a crescendo during COVID, where Americans, by and large, were looking for someone to undercut the status of these elites who are
Hmm.
BoBos. So who do you have come forward in 2016 and understand that this is a development? I think you have Donald Trump comes forward and he says, there's a market here, right, for a different type of American. And I'm going to try to capture that American by using a different term. I mentioned the BoBos, the bourgeois bohemians. I think what Trump has been able to galvanize politically in the last 5 to 10 years is a counter Bobo consensus. And I want to call that consensus the WoBels. And what
Nice.
a WoBel is, right, is a worker and a believer. And you see the difference between the worker versus the bourgeois, see the difference between the believer versus the bohemian. It's almost the exact opposite, the antithetical to the Bobo. I care about the worker, I care about Main Street. I care about policemen. I care about firemen. I care about the lunch pail worker on one hand, but I'm also going to be attuned to the believer. So the WoBel, I think, is the main force behind Trump's administration. He knows who they are. He speaks to them directly. He speaks in an assertive way that appeals to a worker and an assertive way that appeals to a believer. What do you make of this WoBel thesis?
I think that's very helpful. I think it describes very well the group that's coalesced around President Trump, which is in many ways shocking when you think about it. Who is Donald Trump? He's a libertine billionaire. He's not a working class man. He's not anybody whose life is recognizably consistent with Christian anything. And yet somehow he's able to speak in a way that this group responds to. And so they're not looking at it in terms of who is he versus who are we. They're saying, here's somebody that's speaking to my interests and my concerns using language that I can resonate with. And I'm not really all that concerned about the fact that his story and mine are about as divergent as could possibly be.
Yeah, and I wonder too whether this WoBel that I'm talking about, that they were very much kind of in existence in America in the 1950s. So it wasn't like this is a new type of American, but this may have been the old type of American that kind of held the country together. It was kind of that middle class consensus.
Hmm.
And I get us, I get the sense from President Trump that what began in 2016 as an administration that's a television series has to him become somewhat of a providential, it has a providential flavor to it. And I think that the assassination attempt, the difficulty in court, et cetera, I think spiritually he may be gravitating more towards actually being embodied by this real thing rather than what you said, kind of a wealthy libertine who just saw a market there 10 years ago. That I'm guessing there, but
Hmm.
I just sense something different. There's something much more earnest about this administration and decisive about this administration than there was in 2016. So I get the sense that he truly believes in something that he was selling 10 years ago to a much greater degree now than he did 10 years ago.
It's also interesting when you think about the trajectory of the elite and you go back to the 19, say, 30s, 40s, 50s. If you were going to Harvard, you were going to Yale, you were taught that your job was to serve and to serve those who were, let's say, that working class believer type of person. Right? So the WoBels may not have had any more power back then than they do or have had in the last, say, 25 years. But they had people who had an eye out for them and who had a lot of shared values with them so that a group that was Harvard educated and maybe in private, they were given to their own forms of libertinism, but at least in public, right, they were willing to stand for traditional common sense ways of living. And if they were focused in policy and there was maybe a certain kind of elitism to it, it was a noblesse oblige. It was a kind of care for this group rather than a despising of the group, which is really what's emerged over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, well, I mentioned earlier in the show that we went to Green Bay this past week. Green Bay was filled with WoBels. I mean, we rented out a parking spot from Gary, who lived right next to the stadium, and this is just out of like the 1950s. We're like, are there porta potties? He's like, no, no, my bathrooms are inside my house. Just come inside and out. And then within an hour of parking our car there, we're downstairs in his basement that's filled with Miller paraphernalia, playing pool, right? Drinking Miller. He didn't want to drink fruity beer, but we drank Miller. But this is, I imagine that my in-laws, who I love, who live in Arlington, Massachusetts, were Gary to ask them into his house, they'd be like, "We're good, we're good. Well, I don't know what's in your basement, but it could be something unsafe." But
Yeah.
there is a different mentality between these two groups, and you just get the sense that the WoBel just wants to be kind of left alone to be a WoBel, right? Let the Arlington people be the Arlington people. I just want to live this way of life, and I think there's been much more of an allowance to be a WoBel today. Now, that said, Matt, my final assessment of this is I mentioned virtue before, right?
Hmm.
Just because you're working class or just because you're a believer, right, does not mean that you have the virtuous habits ready to uphold the republic. So I think a good couple questions for the Trump administration, if he was thinking about this, or his supporters, is, you know, if the WoBels are to become a majority coalition for the next 50 years, do they possess, in Madison's terms, the sufficient virtue for self-government? And are there things that can or cannot be done by the executive branch, right, to enlarge and to enhance this sufficient virtue that is necessary, this national character that is necessary to make us the great country that Trump wants us to be? And that really is the question for me, not only for the next 1,361 days of the Trump administration, but beyond that. Are we building up those sinews, right, of strength, of real virtue that will allow us, given human fallenness, right, to be a flourishing people?
It's a great question. And I think that's something that the administration needs to work on, needs to give a vision for that. And one of the challenges that comes with the approach they've taken, which has not always been to respect the boundaries of the Constitution or of executive power and things of this sort, is that it does make it difficult to then talk about respect for the rule of law, restraint. I mean, virtue is mostly self-restraint of one sort or another, right? Because our impulses are always toward excess and toward self-aggrandizement and toward pleasure seeking at the expense of other things and at the expense of other people. So most of virtue is a measure of self-restraint, and that's not something that's been modeled to this point by the administration. Now you can say, well, they came in, they had to clean house, they had to overcome the hostility, the entrenched hostility of the bureaucracy, as well as cultural leaders of all types. And so they've had to butt heads a bit in order to begin that process. Okay, I can see that point, whether I concede all of the argument behind it. But if that's the case, there's going to have to be some point where you transition to laying down a different model, to showing a different example. Because if all we've done is expand executive power in order to fight against what the previous administration did, then when the next administration comes along, that's left of center, they're going to use the same power right back at you. And how many more back and forths can we take where we continue to ratchet up the intensity of the fight and pick out winners and losers, use the government to pick the winners and losers, reward friends, punish enemies? We know this isn't the ethic that a republic is supposed to inculcate. So at some point, there's going to have to be a way out of that.
Yeah, and I think that what you're talking about is a real threat, a pendulum swing back and forth. And I think for the Trump administration to be long-term successful, we need to be building pillars, right? Not swinging pendulums.
Right.
And what do those pillars look like? And certainly that if there's a desire to do that, let's build the pillar. But to deconstruct is one thing, and we live in an age of deconstruction, right? To construct and to build, to do things that are positive is another. And I think that, and it remains to be seen over these next 1,361 days, whether that is set in motion. But if that begins to be set in motion, boy, it looks like a lot better picture.
All right, so let's talk just a little bit more about President Trump's self-understanding. What is it he sees himself doing? So you've given some great analysis, Dave, of 25 years from David Brooks, BoBos in Paradise, and really the context leading up to that, and thinking about where the Trump movement came from and how this WoBel group emerged side by side with the BoBos and perhaps has become the majority in some sense, or at least for some presidential elections, that group has a large enough coalition to win elections. But what about President Trump's own vision of where he fits into all this? I think for him, he sees himself as something like the old Roman tribune for this supermajority of real Americans. So we mentioned earlier that there's many people that are praising his first 100 days. And we know there's many people that aren't praising his first 100 days. But he doesn't count that way. And one little bit of evidence of this from his speech was he talked about his approval rating. And he said, well, people say, well, I've got a 44% approval rating. But actually, we all know they pull lots of extra Democrats and not that many Republicans. And if you had a real legit poll, he said, it would be in the 60s or 70s because the polls are all crooked. And so I don't know if he believes that, or if he sort of rhetorically believes that, or that's something in terms of who counts for real or something of that sort. But the fact that he thinks there may be 70% of Americans behind him, right? If he actually believes that, it's false, right? That's not the case. We're much more divided than that. So I think one of the the difficulties that comes with that mindset, and this was something you were alluding to earlier, is that you're not really coalition building. So what hasn't happened? Well, that was a campaign rally that we saw on Tuesday. It was a continuation of the same style and substance that we saw throughout the campaign. He hasn't really moved into the presidential chair in a sense, where you're president of the whole country, where your job, if you're really wanting to build a long-term successful political movement, you've got to get 60% on your side. 50% and one is not really enough. That's not a stable coalition. If he got 60% and you could sustain that, the things you could do would be remarkable. It's very hard to pull that off. And you won't pull that off, first of all, if you think you already have it, but somehow only cheating is preventing you from getting those numbers at the polls or when we're taking a opinion poll online. And you won't get it if you maintain this kind of warpath approach to politics, right? Where you're constantly dividing the nation, you're constantly in battle mode. And so I think there's a model for him that he could follow to build a coalition that would be a winning coalition over time, that would expand the group, bring in some more WoBels or people to be WoBel adjacent who might be sympathetic to many of the concerns of the WoBel coalition you've been talking about. But you're not going to get there if you aim to fight, 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 win, win, win. And as much of the fight is targeted at your own fellow citizens as it is enemies perhaps abroad.
Yeah, and here I'm up two minds. As a lifelong center-right voter in the political realm, my party never had fight, fight, fight. It never really cared truly about winning and delivering wins. I mean, the last 25 years of Republican presidential candidates just woeful. So I want to fight, I want to win, and I truly believe that President Trump's willingness to assert things is a breath of fresh air. But beyond assertion, you need explanation. And then you need action beyond explanation. And I think the only way you're going to get to that long-term coalition is if there's an explanation that goes with the assertion. Right? And then there's a call to action from that explanation, kind of like when you're in a church sermon, right? Let's assertion, explanation, call to action.
Mm-hmm.
So if that happens, and I think it could happen, but if it happens, then we're in a much better place than if it doesn't. And I mentioned the cabinet meeting yesterday. One thing I thought was excellent about that cabinet meeting is he shared the stage with 25 other people.
Mm-hmm.
But by the way, wouldn't have been allowed in most kind of elite circles across the country. They're outsiders, but he gave them the stage, and each of them had 2 or 3 minutes to explain what they're doing in their specific realm. So that was a good thing. I mean, a couple of them, Kristi Noem for one, like poured it on the president, like the sycophancy is just crazy among some of these folks, but
Right.
and maybe that's required, to get the job. But I did like the fact that the praise was extended, right, to 25 other people, because I think that's the movement that we need to see. 25 people working towards something that's good, explaining why they're doing what they're doing, and suggesting how this is going to be better for the American people. So I see a hope there that maybe things move in this direction. You're never going to get Trump to stop thinking about his own person as the force behind all that is good, clean, beautiful, big in the world. But you can get him, I think, to see the longer term legacy of his impact will be by dissemination, the distribution of not only favor, but of attribute to others. So,
Yeah, am I seeing someone succeed him who's got many of the same ideas, and whether that's J.D. Vance or somebody else. But there will be no movement with any significant long-term impact if there's only these 4 years, and then you lose, and the Republican Party shifts in certain ways. It won't go back to the previous version, but there's always another version down the road, another consensus that could emerge. J.D. Vance can explain. Sometimes he chooses not to. Sometimes he decides to go after straw men and caricatures. So he has the ability to do that. He certainly has the intelligence. Whether he'll choose to do that, I think, unfortunately, his weakness is I'm not sure he trusts his voters with the argument. I think sometimes he thinks he has to give the social media answer, right? He has to give the response that's sort of the expected low blow rather than
Mhm.
actually do the explaining. So if he can be convinced that the way to win is to bring in people that can be won over and you actually give the explanation, he could be a great champion for many of President Trump's ideas.
We
Still,
know he can do it, right? We saw that vice presidential debate
right,
where everything hinged on that. And by the way, that worked out great for him. He went from being, for what these polls are worth, the most
weird.
unpopular vice presidential pick to being kind of one of the keys to the victory, right? His
Yeah.
likability after that debate for good reason. If you explain something winsomely to another without attacking them, sometimes you can kind of win people over, right? It's possible to win people over with good arguments.
Yeah, yeah, it was the progressives that were howling after Tim Walz let him do it. So,
Exactly.
all right, well, we'll leave it there for now, but certainly not the final word on President Trump or his movement. As we said at the beginning of the show, we're going to end in a somewhat hazardous way for us by turning to the Kentucky Derby for Tocqueville's crystal ball. We did pick the Masters last time. As usual, we won't get into too much detail about how that went. It wasn't horrible, to be honest. Neither of our picks won, of course, but they didn't do that badly. And Jordan Spieth was kind of in the mix on the outside. So not our worst performance, but we'll still move on quickly to the Kentucky Derby and be grateful for the 3 weeks that has allowed you to forget all the details of what we said last time.
Well, I here in betting on horses, I have a little PTSD because last year I actually picked the trifecta for the Preakness, and then asked a good friend of ours to place that bet for me, and he didn't place the right bet. So here we are thinking we won $2,000. Come to find out the bet hadn't been placed. But one of the things, I mean, there are definitely great issues with gambling. And I remember when I was in the state legislature in New Hampshire, they were talking about slot machines and all the rest. And you can kind of go to some of these places and you just see, the underbelly, right, of the dirtiness of gambling. I'm not saying that doesn't happen with horse racing, but every summer we go to Saratoga Springs and we see the races there. It's one of the greatest events for families. They let you in for $5 a person if you're an adult. Kids are free. Bring in your cooler. Talk about WoBels. There are a lot of WoBels at Saratoga. Actually, there are a lot of BoBos and WoBels at Saratoga. But it's a great time. And the horses are so beautiful. I mean, the horses is a beautiful creature created by God. And so anyway, what we're gonna do, Matt, here is I didn't even know that this was an exotic bet, but there's a bet called the Super High Five.
Nice.
That's like a Trump bet, the super high five,
Yeah.
the super beautiful, clean high five. But you so to get the super high five, you have to correctly predict the winner, second place, third place, fourth place, and fifth place.
Hmm.
Now, had you done this last year on a $1 bet, the Kentucky Derby, that $1 would have won you $316,920. So we're talking about making our listening audience wealthy with these picks.
Right.
$1 and a dream. That's all we're talking about here. All right, Matt. So what's your super high five, top five finishers, and what's your logic behind choosing your
Okay.
top five?
All right. Well, so the Derby is tough because there's always 20 horses that start. So by the time you get the Preakness and the Belmont, it's sometimes like 7, 8 horses. It's not that bad, but 20 horses is a ton. A bunch of them are 30 to 1, 20 to 1 long shots. So I don't know anything about horse racing anyway. I decided to go full MAGA here. So first, I had to eliminate the ones that we're definitely not going to pick. The favorite is journalism. Definitely not. Fake news. We cannot pick journalism. There's also a horse called Publisher. More fake news. Get out of here. There's one called Sandman. That might be Sleepy Joe Biden's favorite pick, but I'm not going with Sandman.
Okay, wow.
There's
You're
Citizen
going full
Bull.
on Trumpista here. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, no, there's Citizen Bull. That sounds like the French Revolution to me. I'm not going to pick that one. East Avenue. That sounds like something near Wall Street. That's no Main Street. right? Avenues by themselves, right? That can't possibly be Main Street. So I got those five off the table. Here's my five, and I think you'll get the common theme as we go. So winner, I've got sovereignty, of course, right?
Nice.
America first, 5-1, so it's got pretty good odds anyway, but got to be the winner.
All right.
Second place, well, the horse is called Coal Battle, but obviously
It's
we'll have to
clean.
call it Clean, Beautiful Coal Battle. 30-1
Nice.
shot, but okay, out of 20 horses, I mean, that's not that bad. My third place, I've got American Promise.
It's an easy one.
Enough
Easy one.
said. Yep.
Yep.
Fourth place, Admire Daytona. I mean, who doesn't? Daytona 500, Real America,
WoBel.
stock
That's
car racing.
WoBel. Daytona.
Exactly. WoBels everywhere. And lastly, for Trump, for the Golden Bathroom and all the rest, we got fifth place, Chunk of Gold. So those are my five. Four of them are 30-1 long shots. So I'm not saying it's likely, but my guess is if you do the math, that's going to give you a pretty good return on your investment.
That might give you 2 million, I'm guessing. You have four 30-1 horses that finish second through fifth after sovereignty. But I'm actually going up to Cripple Creek with my wife and friends. I'm gonna actually make a $1 bet on those five horses. And if it comes true, I don't know what, Matt. Not only will I take you to the draft next year, I'll take you to the Super Bowl.
All right.
At a minimum. All right. So here are mine. They're not going to be likable in the Trump world, but I actually think that from everything I've read, the leading horses are really, head and shoulders above the others. So the odds give us a pretty good picture of, who's going to place 1 through 5. I think from everything I've heard, journalism is a pretty safe bet at number 1.
All right.
So I'll have journalism to win. Sovereignty, as you mentioned, 5-1, really great horse. I have sovereignty placing second. Luxor Cafe could be a little bobo, something French about that.
Yeah.
But number 3, and then fourth Grande at 21, and then fifth Burnham Square. So journalism, sovereignty, Luxor Cafe, Grande, and Burnham Square. If you want to get into the terminology of exotic bets, what you want to do, and you want to impress your friends, say, I want a super high five box, 50 cents, for horses 8, 18, 7, 10, and 9. That'll cost you $60. But if it comes true, you might be getting $500,000 at the end of the day. But
Wow.
it's the fastest 2 minutes in sports. It's like you can't go to the bathroom at any point when they're going to go to the post. So it's
a great time. We watch it every year. We always stumble upon it just about 6:47 as they're about to, if the horse is lined up, and yeah, we love it. But know nothing about it. Well, we'll see, Dave. So this is a fun one. We'll no doubt get lots of postcards from people of exotic locations with all their winnings. But
exactly, that's right.
And we'll enjoy the race on Saturday. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thanks, as always, for joining us. You can reach us if you want to comment or congratulate us on our picks at democracyinamericatoday@gmail.com. We'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
2020 vision.